Hey friends, Mindy here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing a start to finish. This is going to be part one. I'm going to be making an art journal out of this large envelope. So I have already sealed this envelope closed. You could certainly leave it open if you wanted to have like the pocket, but it just makes it a little bit easier to cover it if you seal it. So I went ahead and sealed it, folded it in half, burnished it down really well just to make that part easier when I go to fold it. Once I have all the collaging done, it's much easier if you've already kind of made that fold in there. So I have a bunch of vintage paper here that I'm going to be using in various sizes and fonts and patinas, and I love these. These are from my website, which is called chosenandcrafting.com. If you're interested, I do have packs of vintage paper over there. These are some of the scraps, and so I'm just adding these on in random places. I am making note to be careful about how I cover over where the spine is going to be. I don't want to have like the edge of a paper right there because it will makes it trickier. This is just keeps it nice and secure. And then I'm also making sure to go off the page so that I can wrap this cover just like I would do really any other kind of paper, except I'm just doing it with vintage scraps, and I'm trying to kind of balance out, the patina, and some of them are more white, some of them are darker. I also have some music page. I'm trying to make sure that that's everywhere. I also have some German from an old German book in there. I have some French, all the papers that I love so much. And so I just have those collaged on there. And once I have that everything done, I'm going to dry that really well before I move on to my next step, just using my heat tool, or you could let it air dry. And then for the next step, I'm going to now turn this over and I'm going to trim it down just a little bit like I would do, if I was covering in scrapbook paper or even fabric. It just makes it easier if they're a little bit more even. And I'm cutting out the little corners as well, just to make that process easier to get a nice corner when I wrap that. And so just like with any other cover that I do, you always want to start with opposite sides. So I'm going to actually start on the short sides for this, and I'm going to do this kind of in the same way. I am using matte medium. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. That's what I collaged everything down with. It was a matte medium. And I did a coat underneath and then a coat over the top. I'm going to do the same thing with this wrap. So I am just kind of holding this down just for 1 second, but doing it this way will make sure that it acts like a glue and glues the paper down. But then when you do the layer over the top, it acts like a seal. And so especially for some of these papers that are really super porous, this is just really helpful, especially so you don't go through so much paint or ink or whatever. And it also gives you a little bit different of a play time when you're adding inks or paints over the top of it, and which is my intention to do with the cover. So just I did both of the short sides there, and I'm going to do the long sides now. You've seen me cover plenty of books before, but it's the same process. It's just a little bit trickier because you have, the little individual sections of paper, and then some of them are thinner than others. And so you just kind of have to take care to get it, just burnished down really well, and make sure that you have a good coat of this matte medium underneath first and then over the top as well. I just find that makes for the best result. And then I will do the same thing where I make sure that this is nice and dry. And then you could certainly add anything you kind of want to the inside. If you wanted to add some scrapbook paper or, something different to the inside, I'm actually going to use the same papers. I'm just going to use bigger sections for the inside. So I have this big piece of beautiful music paper and some dictionary paper and just some of that German again, just larger sections for the inside. So now we're back to the outside cover, and what you saw me just add there is actually a gesso wash. So I keep some in a gesso bottle, and it just makes it easier, so I'm not having to mix it up every time I want to use it. It's just watered down gesso, and I'm just covering this whole thing just to kind of help pull everything together, to even everything up. And I don't want the background, I want the texture, like the visual texture of the background paper, I don't want them to be the focal image, if that makes sense. So adding this little bit of gesso just kind of helps just tone everything down just a little bit. And then I'm going to come in with a paper towel and pull up some different sections. And again, because these papers are different, they kind of soak in all of these things just a little bit different. They just react different, which is part of the effect that I love of doing it this way. So then I'm going to dry this really well. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing on the inside, just add a wash of gesso just applying this all over, and then I'll pull back some areas just a little bit with some a paper towel. And then I'm coming in with a heavier bodied gesso and my little fingers, and I'm just going to kind of try to blend some of these areas out a little bit where the joins of the papers are, especially if there's like a hard line or something. It just, I realize this is all going to look like a hot mess until it doesn't, but it's just kind of the process of doing a mixed media, anything really. But I'm just adding this, you know, heavier in some areas, lighter in others, and but mostly in sections where I'm trying to kind of blend the two pages together, and this just gives this kind of a cloudy, blendy effect. And it, once I start adding color and stuff, it just helps it so that you don't see, like, you know, the very stark edges of each one of these papers. Now, and another thing you could certainly do, if you don't like the rough, you know, different random shapes, you could certainly trim those down and collage them down into, you know, perfect squares or whatever. I just like the randomness of the torn edges. And then now that I have that dry, I'm going to refold this again. Now you can see it's just a little bit easier to make that fold, especially with all these layers of paper and everything. And I want to just be mindful of where that edge is, because now I'm going to come in with some texture paste. So I am using the what's it called? Funky Stone stencils from the Creative Worship Stamps. And I'm using light and fluffy modeling paste from the Crafters Workshop. I really love light and fluffy modeling paste. It's a nice weight. It's flexible. It doesn't really crack. And I'm doing a pretty thin layer of it here. And I'm just randomly doing this in different areas. I'm trying to be careful not to go over the spine section, because I'm not sure how that would hold up over time. So I'm kind of working right up next to the spine wherever I can. And just randomly doing this. I'm not even concerned if I'm getting a full impression for each of these stones. In fact, I don't really want that. I want this to be very distressed and just random looking as much as possible. And so I am using the backside of my palette knife here in just a few different areas. So this is what's going to be the backside of the cover. And I'm doing a lighter coat simply because I still want some of that book paper to kind of show through the texture paste, and it will if it's a thin enough layer. And also just for drying time, I don't want to have to sit around and wait for it. So after this dried for a little while, I did use my heat tool some to try to speed it up, but I will tell you this is not completely dry when I start this process here. But I am just kind of going in with some acrylic inks. These first colors that I'm adding are Liquitex brand. These are Yellow Medium Azo and Quinacridone Magenta. And I know this looks really crazy. I did spray just a little bit of water first, and then I just dropped the ink in, and now I'm going to start mixing it around. And this is really just, you know, personal preference. There's a beautiful like mid-range orange color, corally color that comes out of these two colors when they mix that I just absolutely love. And so I'm trying to kind of find a good balance between mixing the two colors. I don't want it to be too orange. I don't want it, you know, I don't want it to be just like in your face either. And so I'm adding water, spraying water. I'm adding more color back in to kind of balance it the way, trying to get that certain coral color that I'm looking for. And this is really just a play. And if you don't want your colors to mix, acrylic inks are permanent when they're dry. So you could, you know, add layer of color upon layer instead of doing it that way, instead of having them mix. I just like the way that they look when they mix. And so I'm helping them. I like the way that it looks when it runs between the texture paste. And it's really fun because the texture paste absorbs this differently than the background paper. So you just get a different look to it. And it's really fun with that stencil, the Funky Stones stencil, because it actually gives it kind of that texture to it. So I just really enjoy that. And I'm just letting all of that pool on top of my nonstick craft mat that I'm working on, because I'm going to use that ink to color the inside of the cover. So you can see I just laid that right down into all of that ink, and that's totally fine because I'm using that to give ink to, you know, color to the inside of this cover. And so now I've laid this flat, I'm going to add in a couple different colors. These are actually Amsterdam colors. So this is Quinacridone Rose, and what's the other one? Naples Yellow Deep. And I really like the softer color of Naples yellow. But I'm just going to go through the same process. I'm adding color, adding water, letting them mix, letting it run around, you know, drip off the page. When I kind of get it where I want it, I'm trying to let it run through the texture paste and around the texture paste, just because you get different fun puddles and things when you do it this way. And at one point I had considered like leaving this just very, very bright. And then in the end, I ended up having to kind of knock it back just a little bit because it was just a little too intense for me. But that's just all part of the fun and the process. And you kind of just work with it until you get it the way that you want it. And I would say if you get to the point where you're like, I hate this, then just keep going. And then add another layer, dry it, add something else. It can all be worked with. And so you can see now I'm coming in with a paper towel and just pulling up some of this color because I do still want some of my background to show through. I want all those beautiful papers to be able to be seen in the background. And it does look a lot different in person than it does on my camera right now, but that's okay too. You can see I'm just kind of pressing now the cover down into all that ink that I let pool in there. And again, I'm going to go through that same process. Here, I'm adding just a little bit more of that magenta because there's so much orange on the inside. And so I'm just adding it in a few places. I'm going to spray some water and let it drizzle down, let it mix together. And then I'm going to heat this, you know, try to dry this with my heat tool as much as I can. And then I will let it sit also. And so that's why this is going to be part 2, because I will add the signature to this, and then I also want to create a journal topper for this. That's kind of that open section there on the cover is where I want to put something to like a journal topper of some kind. I haven't decided what I want that to look like yet, but that section right across the middle is where that will go right there. And then this is what the back cover looks like. So stay tuned for part 2. And if you liked this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Be sure to check out my website, my Facebook group. All of the links for everything are down in the description. And until next time, bye.